This is Dr. Karmen Smith, spiritual teacher and author of the book, The I Am Solution. I'm coming to you from beautiful Baobab Cafe, which is a town square in Las Vegas, Nevada. We're on Las Vegas Boulevard, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here to talk about spiritual issues and things that are of concern to everyone. Because a lot of people are waking up. They're waking up to who they really are. They're waking up to seeing behind the veil of what has been hidden politically or maybe in their own lives. So as we wake up to ourselves and discover those things that are within us that need to be transformed or transmuted, we are then able to see beyond the veil, if you will, what has been hidden in the past of what is in public view. So as within, so without. So whatever is happening and the awakening that's happening within us all, it will be viewed on the outside of us. We will be more aware of things on the outside of us. And so I invite you through these series of videos and these series of lectures to go within during this new year, because people make New Year's resolutions and they want to do better, they want to be better, but when it comes right down to it, are you really able to see what is blocking you from your highest potential? Can you see what is blocking you from that divine energy moving through and as you in this world? And so this is a practice that we all can participate in. And I don't care what kind of spiritual guru you are, you're always working on yourself. So there's no point where you arrive. There's no point where you've made it and you are this spiritual mountaintop person and you stay there. There is always growth. And so during these lectures, I'm going to be talking about my experience with looking within, my experience of looking at the things that are difficult to look at within the personality and within the ego, and the things that need to be healed within us all. So I believe that's probably my counseling experience coming forth, because I don't believe that you can help heal someone or have them face something that is difficult if you haven't faced those difficulties yourself. So if I haven't faced those trauma experiences myself within my own life, I do not believe that I can be an effective teacher, leader, counselor if I haven't gone through that journey myself. Only when I have gone through that journey can I show someone the way out or a way out. And coming from personal experience, it is more powerful. So thank you for joining me today through this lecture of creating a new self, an improved self, a self that is more in alignment with the divine. So welcome to a new you, a new year. And so one of the first things that I'd like to talk about is, what does it look like when we go within ourselves? What does it look like when we actually do a mental and spiritual and emotional autopsy of ourselves? And people will say, why doesn't the world change? The world is so, topsy-turvy, is so crazy, we're in crisis. And one of the reasons is because we haven't gone within ourselves, within that crazy part of ourselves that contributes to the consciousness of the world. And so we need to have the courage and the insight that this is where we need to go within ourselves. So why don't we have the courage? Well, the reason we don't have the courage is that we want to believe that we are not flawed and that all of the problems are outside of ourselves. So, for example, my greatest teachers were people at my job. Because the people at my job back in the day when I was a therapist working for the county, I perceived that all of the slights that I had that were coming towards me, I could always point to that other person and say that other person has the flaws, that other person has the problem. And as long as I was doing that, there was no personal growth. So that's number one and foremost, is that there's no personal growth when we understand that everything is outside of us and not within us. Okay? And so I just want to say that as I'm talking, if there are any questions, it's okay to ask questions too and raise your hand or whatever, and I'll give you the mic maybe, or you can talk loud because we're live on Facebook right now. So what I was talking about is that people will look outside of themselves and look at the craziness that's going on in politics, or they'll look at something going on in the world and they'll say, isn't that crazy? Isn't that horrible? How can that happen? And we're trained to look outside of ourselves and see the flaws and see the crazy outside of ourselves. But we are not trained to look within ourselves and see the crazy and see the just things that need to be healed and brought to the light. And so we'll go years and years without addressing our own issues. And we will go through relationship after relationship without addressing any of the issues that have to do with us. And so I was saying that one of my biggest teachers was my job and the people at my job, because I had experiences that were given to me as gifts. Now at the time, I didn't think they were gifts. I thought it was a horrible experience. But it was basically coworkers that would talk about you behind your back, coworkers that had malice. Malice meaning that, oh, I'm gonna get her fired because I have a friend that would really like that job. So people do think these things, and you don't think about yourself and say, well, how am I contributing to this? What do I need to clean house within myself? It never occurred to me to look at myself and see the malice that I had. Now, the reason for that is because I could clearly see this person in front of me that I found out they were doing the malice. So it was so easy to see them. It was much harder to look at the malice within my own heart. Now, did I have malice? Absolutely. I joke and say that I had a PhD in revenge. I know you guys are much healthier than I was. So I'm just saying, I grew up in a household where if you did somebody wrong or if you did something, I'm gonna make sure there's a consequence. You get them back, right? So I grew up with that. So here I am, God is confronting me with people that have this malice in their heart. It's directed at me. And so I was so quick to, okay, how can I get her back? How can I turn this situation so that I win? And what was happening to me was I was being just as vengeful as they were. And I could not see that. So over time, this did not happen overnight, people. It happened over time. I started to see that this person that I was blaming all of this stuff for, that same malice, that same vindictiveness, that same hatred, whatever you want to call it, was so thick in me. And how did I heal that? By seeing it within myself. Now, this is where people get hung up. They can't see their own stuff. They can see everybody else's stuff so clearly. But I needed to see my own stuff. And I knew somehow deep within myself that if I did see it and I did heal it, my life would be different, much better. I just knew that. So how do you go from really feeling victimized by another person's vengefulness, and then being the victor in your own life and not having those people around because you got the lesson? So as soon as you recognize and start to heal yourself and start to clean house, as you will, your outside situation changes. And I think all of us may have an experience of that, where we've made a change in our lives, working on ourselves. And then what shows up is a better life outside of ourselves. So as soon as I started to see how I was vindictive, saw how I held grudges for years. I'm not talking about grudge for a little bit. I'm talking about grudge for years, where like 10 years later, you remember a slight. And not only do you remember, it still has a sting to it. So, yes.
How do you get out of the justification of feeling that right, feeling that I'm right.
Right.
And it's justified. And people around you are saying, yeah, you're right for feeling that way, and you're justified for your reaction. How do you get out of that?
Right. That's a good question. I'm going to repeat it because I didn't give the mic to you, but you were saying, and you said it so eloquently, how do you get out of feeling justified? You know, and you have people around you that are telling you, yeah, you know, you need that, yeah, that was wrong, what they did, and all that kind of stuff. It sounds like a little kid when I say it. And when you were explaining it, it kind of reminded me of a little kid. But I'm saying that because that is kind of what it's like. It's like Paul said in the Bible, when I was a kid, I did kid things, childish things. And then when I got older, he's not talking about age-wise, he's talking about got more practice in being different and having that Christ consciousness. Then he put away childish things. And one of the things that we have to kind of, or that I had to kind of get to, and I can only suggest to other people, is I had to know the mind of God. Because what I'm talking about is going into the mind of God. And I grew up thinking that God was in the clouds somewhere and had a white beard, because I grew up in a Methodist church, AME church. And they didn't say that God was inside of you. I don't remember hearing that. It was only you pray outside of yourself. So once I started to say, well, is there another alternative to being vengeful and feeling justified? And what is it? Because I want to know what that is, because if I'm going towards that, I got to know what it is. Just like if you want a Bentley, you should know what a Bentley is, right? You should test drive it. You like the look of it. You find out how much it costs. How can we know the mindset that we're supposed to have if we don't know the personality of God or Jesus or Christ or Buddha or whoever you want to name as that light source? So I knew that my life was going to be more powerful if I knew the mind of God, because the mind that I had was a mind that could not deal with relationships, was a mind that held on to stuff and felt justified doing it, was a mind that was unforgiving, was a mind that felt victimized. So I needed to get into a more powerful mind. And so the attributes of God were very important to me. And that led me to New Thought or metaphysics or whatever it is I'm talking about right now. I don't label it. If I had to put a label on it, it's the lessons of love, right?
Yeah.
I don't need to put, whatever this is, on it. I would know what to call it. But so I need to know what love is. And I grew up with conditional love, not unconditional love. So conditional love is, you have to do everything the way I want you to do it. And if you don't, that's a slight. Do you see where I went with that? I got my judgment back. I got my boundaries up. And I got my vengeful, you can't be, Now, is God that way?
No.
I have to ask myself these questions because I was walking around like, you did what? Right? I don't even have to say, right? Now, is God doing that to me? And if I'm thinking God is like that, then I'm justified. Now, if I'm thinking God is unconditional, I love you. You did that, I love you. You did that and that and the other. I just love you so much. And love changes people. Because love, I want to do right. I want to be in alignment with that Godhead that thinks, I love you. And so if I'm not in alignment with that, I instantly know it because I know the mind of God. And so I know when I'm not in alignment with that and I'm trying to justify that. Now here's another, so the attributes of God are love, unconditional. It's not based on your behavior. Now that's a big one. God does not base his love on your behavior. Did you know that? Weren't you taught that God is love? Were you taught God doesn't love you if you cheat on your wife? God doesn't love you. Were you taught that? Because that's not true. I'm sorry. It's not true. God doesn't love you anymore if you get hooked on a drugs or alcohol. Did you hear that? It's not true if you heard that. God does not love you based on your behavior. That's a big one. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be consequences. This is big. So I had to know the mind of God. God does not love you if you do something outside of morals. It's agape love. Agape love is unconditional. Love regardless. And the reason is because God is love. So if I want to emulate God, what do I have to be? I have to be love, no matter what. Right? I know you know that.
I believe it.
I know, we talk about that. It's like you have to cut me open and what pours out is love. Now, before you cut me open, and you're going to find some resentment, you're going to find some malice, you're going to find some vengeful stuff, you're going to find all kinds of stuff. But you would not find unconditional love. That was something that I had to practice, and I had to know the mind of God. Now, here's another thing. When you are emulating that energy of love, there are people that are going to fall by the wayside because they're vibrating at a different energy. This is a vibration that I'm talking about. So their vibration is going to be on, if they're still in critical mode and in judgment mode, it's not going to mesh with yours. And so people have a hard time with that because they think, oh, I'm going to change. I'm going to have the same friends. I'm going to have the same family that I'm close to. And when you're vibrating at this frequency, it may offend some people. They may be confused by it. And I'll give you an example. If you have friends that are around you that are very critical, and they will say, oh girl, you need to be justified. Oh, you shouldn't do. And you have those kind of friends and you start vibrating with love, they don't know what to say to you. Because they'll come in and they'll go, oh, the traffic was so bad today and blah, blah, blah. And you were just high because you were meditating or in your zone. and you are just so grateful to be alive, and they come in complaining, and they'll say, so how was your morning? And you say, it was fabulous. Crickets, 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 because they only can relate to you if something bad is happening. So people will say to me, oh, how was your New Year? My New Year is absolutely stunning. I am having a fabulous, and they'll say, oh, well, the shutdown and blah, 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 and Kavanaugh and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that something? Life is really good. And they'll go, crickets, crickets, crickets. They don't know what that's all about, because you are an anomaly. You are different. How's retirement? I am having the best time ever. Really? Don't you need something to do? I am fabulous. And they keep wanting something, right? Deborah, wanting something bad. Is there something bad in your life so we can talk about it and expand on it and find nuances about it? No, there's nothing. So those people usually will fall by the wayside, and you love them, and that's okay, because everybody has their own journey. You're not judging them, you're just loving them, and you're loving life. Mm-hmm.
How do you love them without the engagement? How do you love, I guess, from a distance? How do you love, without the interaction and
That's
the
good.
conversations?
Yeah.
Because
How do you love without engagement, like constant engagement with that person? And so what I'm talking about is, this is how you are. Like, it's not something that you put on, right? It's something that you are. You are this love. That is you. And so when they are talking about all the bad stuff and everything like that, and we're talking about people that are, usually their conversations go towards negativity. And so you are not even in that space, because you don't see life the same way. You don't see life the same way. You don't see, and this is a place that you get to. Okay, so you are that person. You have the heart of God within you. And that doesn't mean you stop working on yourself. I have to caveat that. I'm not saying that people are this perfection, but I'm saying that you are embodying this most of the time. And so when that negativity comes towards you, you recognize that they're in a different space. They're in a different headspace. They haven't done the work. They don't see what's in themselves. And that's fine. Because God loves you, knowing that you're on a journey, a spiritual journey, a spiritual path to get to his heart, right? So everybody is on that path at different points, right? I don't know if you're a hiker, but you're at different points in a hike, right? So the trail is weaving around, and that other person is on that trail, and you're on a different trail, and you just support them. I understand what you're saying. Yeah, life is good. I understand what you're saying, yeah, and be a good listener. But I'm not attached to their stuff. I love their heart, because their heart is seeking God. Same thing, we're all on the same journey, it just looks different. We're on the same journey because everybody wants to be the best person they can be, right? Everybody wants to live up to their highest potential. Everybody wants to be at peace. So we're on the same journey. Theirs looks different. I love them through it. I'm not attached to their behavior. I'm not attached to their way of seeing things. I love them. Now, does that sound like God? That sounds like God to me. Because God loves everybody. Now, there's one thing that I want to touch on, which I think is very important, and that is when stuff comes up in your life, and like for me, this was very hard for me. I was so used to looking outside of myself and seeing, oh, that person's judgmental, that person is critical, and I could not see it in me. And I grew up, like I said, with my sister and I would be in front of the TV, and we would criticize every single person on TV. And there were all kinds of shows, Star, like, you know, those, they're big now, but, you know, back then they would have these talent shows. Yeah, Star Search, yeah. And it didn't matter what it was, if it was Star Search or whatever, anybody that was in front of the TV, they were fair game for us to be critical of. So when you grow up with that critical, and we would criticize each other because I had sisters, and that's kind of what you do. And so we would criticize each other, and we'd criticize the TV, we'd come home, we'd be critical of the day or who was at school. I mean, we're just critical girls. And so now you put us in a situation where now we have to be on stage, because we started out as performers. My sister's in musical theater, and I started out as an actress years ago. You put us on stage, and we're going to be afraid. Do you know what we're going to be afraid of? Afraid of criticism. Why? Because we're very critical of ourselves. We were very critical of ourselves, and then it projected outward where we were critical of other people. Let me say that again. I grew up, I was trained to be critical. That's what we did. That was just what we did. We were judgmental and critical. So when we decided we're going to sing or we're going to act on stage, we were not like, oh yeah, let's do it. It took everything within us to do this. Why? Because we had a critical nature, and it started with being critical of ourselves. We were afraid of criticism. So we had to look at that in order to be out there in public. I could not have a fear of criticism if I was up here talking about this kind of stuff. This is about talking about how to improve ourselves. You know what resistance there is to people looking at themselves? There's a huge amount of resistance out there. It's so easy to see it in other people. So we need to have compassion for ourselves when we start to look at ourselves, I mean really deeply. We need to look at ourselves and our faults the way God does. I see you criticize people, but let me tell you, sweetie, with that wonderful, loving voice, I made you to be talented. I made you to shine. So as soon as you release all that stuff, I want you to just go out there and shine just as beautiful, and I'll be here. And if you are afraid of it and continue to be afraid of it, I'll still be here loving you. That's what we do to ourselves when we find these things that we don't like. Malice, resentment. God is saying to me, Karmen, I know where this came from. It came from your dad. You had a hatred and an anger towards your dad, and it's coming out in all men. It's coming out with your boss when you're talking to your boss. I see it. Do you see it? I'm going to love you through it. I love you anyway. Love you. So if God is saying that to me, I can say that to myself and say, yeah, I need to look at that anger towards my dad. Yeah, it's time. I've taken it out on too many people. That resentment, yeah, it's time. I need your help though. I need your help through it. And then when I find myself being resentment and critical towards my boss, that voice is saying, there it is. Do you see it, Karmen? Do you see it? It came out there. Okay. I see it. Okay. Got it. Because I was so sure it was my boss. I was so justified. Dang it. And then when I began to heal that, the boss disappeared. See, that's the magic. when we start healing ourselves, we see these things that we thought were obstacles, and they were actually our teachers, and they begin to fade away. And then there's another challenge, and it's showing you something else, and then we work on that, and we begin to fade away. So that's the magic of working on ourselves. I think that's more powerful than resolutions, New Year's resolutions. I think working on ourselves with that compassionate voice, that God voice within us, loving ourselves through it, is the most powerful practice. It's a spiritual practice that we can do. And when we begin to do it more and more, it becomes easier. So as I'm working on myself, and it's a never-ending process, I find that I have more attributes of God. So you become more powerful. Your love becomes more powerful, not contingent on this and contingent on that, because people are flawed. They're on their journey, remember? They're gonna do stuff. My job is not to police what they're doing, but to love them through it. It's so much lighter, you know. So, yes.
I keep forgetting. I mean, I just keep forgetting. So, like, what can we do to, like, what kind of spiritual practice can we do to just get it?
So you're forgetting
forgetting that I'm not the police. Forgetting that
yeah,
forgetting to come from a place of love.
yes,
Forgetting to be love.
yeah,
Like it's not sticking.
yes. You're such a sweetie.
She agrees.
My sister.
Sisters, right?
That's my sister.
Yes, and well, you're such a sweet person. Let me just tell you who you are for a second, because in order for us to even come to the point where we say, you know, I feel like I'm being the police, I feel like I'm being too judgmental or too critical, and I'm the police of everybody, that takes courage, and that takes spiritual courage, and that takes something that a lot of people don't do, is they would never come forward and say that. So first of all, I just love you for even it being in your consciousness. It's right there. And so knowing, like I said, knowing what's on the other side, nobody told me this, that you become more powerful when you have recognized and are constantly working on releasing that part of your personality, because it is egoic. It comes from the ego. And so having the attributes of God and replacing it with that, and recognizing when you're doing it, because it's such a part of your personality, just like criticism and judgment was a part of my personality. I told you I was trained in it. You were trained in that. So that just tells us that we need to be more aware and more vigilant. And it's something that we're going to be doing all the time. It's not just something that we pick up and say. It's like something, okay, how am I being the police in this moment? How am I being critical in this moment? Most people don't do that. What would God do in this moment? You've seen those bracelets and say, what would Jesus do? What would Buddha do? Whatever. You have to have an example of what that looks like. So do you have an example in your life of somebody trying to walk this path? That is helpful. I'll tell you that. She points at me. I'm trying. Yeah, having an example is so helpful. You remember when you took math and, you know, you have this book and it's showing you the problem. Don't you need to have an example of them doing it right? Because I will be doing that problem wrong and then giving up on it, right? So an example in your life, in your family. Now this is where it gets deep. I'm getting goosebumps just as I thought about it. The reason you want an example in your life is because if you can't pick one in your family, you are it. Tag, you are it. You have to be the example, because people will gravitate towards that light and they won't even know why. They can't articulate it, they'll just know something in the vibrational field has changed. It gets spooky, people. There's magic here. So you can ask him too. It's spooky.